Ooh.
Welcome, everyone. We hope you're well fed. We hope you're well rested because it's time for some tennis. Now, you might notice there's only two of us here. We're without our Australian today. Candace, can we survive without Steve? Are we going to be able to pull this off without him here to guide us with his accent or whatever?
Survive. I'm thriving. We don't need him.
I think we'll be just fine. We've got a bunch of tennis to cover, 4 tournaments. Apologies that we're a day late, but all this stuff is actually not happening right now. So you still have a chance to get in some of those outrights. A bunch of those markets are actually open. So let's start. We'll dive into Belgrade here. We've got the top half. Let me just pull this off here. Apparently, it's hard to look when I put that thing on. This is the top half of the draw here in Belgrade. Novak Djokovic is our 1 seed. We see Fucsovic down there at the bottom. A bunch of fun names there in the middle. A lot of Serbians here. It's fun to see a lot of Serbians in the Serbian draw open. So what do you think here, Candace? How do you see this top half shaking out?
Well, I mean, you look straight to Djokovic, right? And while he was disappointing last week, you have to imagine he's going to have a little bit more inspiration, I suppose. You'd think he'd want to do well here in Belgrade. It is fun to see all the Serbians. I think it's a reminder once again about how deep the men's tennis is there right now. And that's, it's interesting because it's been that way for a while, but it does feel like it is, even maybe a little bit stronger than it has been in recent years. Laszlo Djere there, very interesting. Kekmanovic has been playing relatively well coming into this as well. It's hard to see Djokovic losing for mine. I think we talked last week about in Monte Carlo how he had a little bit of a tricky draw, obviously facing the likes of Sinner right off the bat. Nothing like that here, so I'd have to imagine he makes his way through this half.
Yeah, it's hard not to pick Novak. It is a smaller tournament. They actually haven't had this tournament since I think like 2013, so it's been almost 8 years. But you look at this quarter, his disappointing performance last week. It is in his home country. I expect him to do very well here. I mean, I think he can kind of close his eyes and not even really play his best tennis here and make it through this first quarter. And then the second quarter, we'll see if Karatsev gets back to that great form we saw for a little while. But I do think this top half is kind of Novak or pass. It is hard as I look through. Laszlo Djere would be fun, but he's stuck in Novak's quarter. Maybe someone like Kekmanovic, but again, in Novak's quarter. That second quarter, there's just not any names that really inspire me there. Was there any, maybe secondary names in that second quarter you might have circled?
There really wasn't. I think what I found difficult about this half in particular are that you say the interesting players not only are in Novak's quarter, but they're also Serbians. And Djokovic, much like Nadal with the Spaniards, they do impeccably well against their countrymen. So, and that's got a little bit of a double whammy there, unfortunately. And it really kind of makes, I think, this half, as you say, kind of Djokovic or bust. But I do think this tournament, because you mentioned how it hasn't been played, I do think this tournament is kind of the replacement for Budapest. I think they moved it here.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's what happened. Any other thoughts here on this half before we jump into the bottom?
Nope.
All right, let's scroll down here. John Millman, our 7 seed, you see there at the top. Matteo Berrettini, the Italian, our 2 seed, down there at the bottom. Again, a bunch of Serbians in the middle. The bottom half, a lot more competitive, in my opinion. What do you think, Candace?
Yeah, it's pretty competitive there in the bottom half. You see Krajinovic, who really had a little bit of I guess you'd say like a roller coaster match there against Travaglia. That's a tough first round match. He was able to get himself through there. He'll play Milojevic, who I think has been playing on the Challenger Tour coming into this and who was pretty impressive against Coria. But that bottom half is tough. I mean, if you told me that any of those 4 made it through, or at the very least 3 of the 4, it wouldn't surprise me one bit. I think from a betting perspective, I'm going to focus a little bit towards this third quarter that we have here. You see John Millman making it through against Petrovic. Good performance by him. Good to see John Millman winning matches again. But those latter 2, or I guess it's the 2 middle matches in there for the first round are interesting to me. You see Cuevas against Ruusuvuori. I would lean towards Pablo just because he is an expert on the surface, even though he is a bit older. But the Finn should be interesting enough, even if this is his worst surface. But that Delbonis-Berankis match is interesting even more so to me. I'm going to lean towards Delbonis. We know this is his surface. And if he can make it through that, I think that's a pretty wide open quarter for him. This is a player who we know this is the surface he thrives on. And aside from Cuevas, who has had a lot of success on clay, but isn't exactly what he once was, I don't really see anybody there who at least really, really wants to play on this surface.
Yeah, when I look at these quarters, there's one match really in each quarter, and in the third, I look at that Pablo Cuevas match. I think either him or Rusavari is actually in good shape to make a run here. Millman's been playing better, but I don't know if this is his best service. Maybe Lajovic kind of takes care of business, but I think what you said about Delbonis makes a lot of sense. I think that'll be kind of difficult for him. So I think the winner of that Cuevas-Rusavari match is a really interesting candidate to win that quarter. And then the bottom, I think it's the battle of the Italians there in the second round. I don't know what Berrettini's form is going to look like, and I think this will be his first, clay match of the year. Cecchinato played very well. I'm sorry?
Do we ever know?
We don't. We don't ever know.
The mystery man.
I know. So we've got him and Cecchinato there. I'm going to lean on Cecchinato's form. I think this is a nice spot for him to win this quarter, and again, possibly challenge the winner of that third quarter. Part of the reason that I like this half of the draw, even though it is kind of tough. This looks like a half of the draw where you get a chance to maybe go through and pick a winner at maybe some better odds. Now, again, if Novak runs through this draw, it's going to be hard to pick any value because he's going to be a huge, huge favorite the entire way through. But do you agree with that? Do you think that, from a betting perspective, if you were going to go through and try and pick someone, is this the half you would attack?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just a difference of perspective, right? Like I'm leaning on the third quarter thinking, okay, I can kind of narrow it down to a match or two of somebody who, if they make it through, they're going to make a run. But I definitely agree that the names that you see in the bottom quarter, they're more realistic chances of winning should something happen to Djokovic there on the top. It was a tricky one because similarly to what I said, you kind of in that top quarter, the people who really jump off the page to me as some of the more logical contenders at decent odds, a lot of them are Serbian. And I just think that, a player like Djokovic gets really motivated against those guys and he knows their game incredibly well. So it's just really tough to pick them, even if a few of them have been playing some nice tennis coming into this, and you'd have to imagine they'll be pretty motivated as well. I know you mentioned Rusavari. I'll say I gave him a long, long look. If I wasn't going to kind of lean on Delbonis, perhaps, I would have given him probably the next nod. So I totally understand your philosophy there. I think the only thing I'm concerned of is how much the surface really blunts kind of his power game, which is the strength that he tends to rely on. Still, at a young age, he's still a little bit more one-dimensional than some of these.
Hey, you've got some Australian support here from Mr. Millman. Our buddy Zampa's in, and it looks like Ace, he can't be here to do the show, but apparently he's just hanging out in the chat, folks. So I don't know what he's got.
The Aussies are invading.
You've got the Australian support there.
Yeah. I mean, we just need like a kangaroo to hop by, and then we're good.
Any other thoughts here on this draw before we jump into our picks?
No.
All right, let's jump into, I think, be pretty straightforward here. We'll start with you, Candace. Who is your pick to win the tournament?
Shocker. My pick to win the tournament is going to be Novak Djokovic for a plethora of reasons, and that we know he's capable on the surface. We know he should be extra motivated back in Serbia, and because his draw, you know what? If you gave him players and said, here, Djokovic, you pick your own draw, I think it might be the draw that he actually got. So unfortunate because he's such a short price that I try my best not to lean on players like that, but that might be a theme of today's show.
There's going to be a lot of consensus today in a few areas on the show, and this is certainly a place to start because my pick to win is also Novak Djokovic. He's the most talented player in this field. As you mentioned, he has a fantastic draw. There's no one that really challenges him in that top half. The bottom half is going to have to spend all that time kind of beating each other up, and if he wants, he has a chance to do well in his home country, look great, take a lot of nice pictures, and maybe not work too hard maybe until that final. So happy to back you with Novak Djokovic. And, of course, our missing co-host agrees here. So it is all hands on deck here for Novak Djokovic.
Oh, I thought he was picking John Millman. What a real Aussie he is.
I should have changed that. I didn't realize that since he was here, I could just kind of type whatever I want next to Steve's name. And
he's coming in here to heckle us, so that must be who he's picking.
That'd be good. I'll try to pepper one of those in as we move forward. So we all like Novak Djokovic here to win. But Candace, how about you? Who was your value pick? I think that you teed this one up a little bit for the people.
I did. I'm going to be going with Delbonis as my value pick. I just think that is kind of a little bit of a sweet spot in the draw. We mentioned a couple players who would make sense there. I guess Millman is one of them, if you really think so. But I like the odds that I saw for Delbonis as far as his next few matches were concerned and outrights in general. I don't think this is a player who has an incredible chance of victory for the entire tournament, but the possibility to make a run and maybe parlay a couple bets as he progresses through the tournament are certainly there.
Absolutely. Now, my value pick here, I sort of teed this up a little bit as well. Marco Cecchinato, I think, has a great chance to beat Berrettini here, a great chance to win that quarter and start to find some form on his better surface here. He hasn't played the best tennis. I think he was my value pick, if not last week, the week before. So going back to the well here, he's about 40-1, and I'm happy to sprinkle a little bit there on him. Now, let's see. What did Steve take as his value
40
pick?
to 1 has been your sweet spot lately, so I'm glad you're sticking to it.
You try to, it's 40-1 is a good number for me. Steve likes Dusan Lajovic, again, the Serbian here. Could do very well at home. I believe, again, I think he was in the bottom half of the draw, or was he the one that was stuck in the top half of the draw? No, he was in the bottom half. So, again, one of those names there. So we're all on board. From a value perspective, the bottom half is where you want to be.
Yes.
As we go through here, Candace, you did not have an unforced error. Steve had Matteo Berrettini. I assume that's for a lot of the reasons that we joked about. His motivation is generally pretty questionable. Now, I had more of kind of a curious unforced error. Although I picked Novak Djokovic to win this tournament, I'm kind of willing to give him a pass here. It's a very small event. It's in his home country. I wonder if he is going to be more focused on doing media and things like that, and maybe not locked in completely on winning the tournament. He's the best player here. If he's even 75% focused, he probably win. But at the same time, I'm happy to kind of stay away from him from a betting perspective, because I wonder what his motivation is like, again, in a 250 in his home country where a lot of other things are going on. Maybe he gets, kind of excited and just decides like, all right, I'll let another Serbian kind of win this thing. So we'll see. As much as he is my pick to win, I am sort of curious and maybe a little worried about his motivation. What do you think about that?
I was kind of interested from you because, we didn't get to talk about it much, but from what we saw in Monte Carlo, obviously both him and Nadal went down. Were you more concerned by what you saw from Djokovic than Nadal in that tournament?
I was. The Nadal match, he looked frustrated. He didn't look like he was quite as sharp, whereas Djokovic just seemed to lose the plot and lose it quickly. Yeah. Nadal fought back. He was able to take a set there and, wasn't terribly close in the third, but I was a little more concerned with Novak's result than I was Nadal's, for sure.
Yeah, I was too. It was one of those tricky ones because when the match actually happened, I think we're all like, whoa, how did he beat? I guess I would say, at least for Nadal, the player he lost to is a player who we've seen have quite a bit of clay court success, right? So it seemed a little, even if it was unexpected, it felt a little bit more logical. The Djokovic one to me is interesting because I feel like it might be one of those matches that people tend to look back now with a little bit of hindsight bias. In the moment, you're like, well, how does Dan Evans beat Djokovic here on clay? But then he played well enough after that maybe it kind of makes people feel better about it. I'm not sure it necessarily did for mine, just from what we saw on the other side of the net. But I have a feeling that that's what we're going to see happen. People will kind of write it off as like, oh, he was just really hot this week.
Yeah, I think that is. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It is. I think people maybe should be a little more concerned than kind of they were. So let's move forward here on our overvalued players. Steve thinks Krivinovic is overvalued. Whatever, he's not here. Candace, who was your overvalued player?
Oh my gosh, my overvalued player is going to be Matteo Berrettini.
I like this. It's going to save me some time.
For what we talked about before, you just never quite know what you're going to get from him. And he does tend, especially in a tournament like this, a smaller tournament where he's a higher seeded player, he does tend to get some attention as far as outrights are concerned. And there are just some players out there who are very difficult to trust over a course of matches. No matter what level of tournament you're dealing with, they kind of play to the level of the opposition. And I've always found him to be one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense to me. And of course, I picked Matteo Berrettini too. He's one of the favorites to win these tournament. I actually think might lose his second round match here. Will be his first match since he has a bye. It's a tough draw for him. He's not necessarily in great form. We don't know what, again, his motivation level looks like here. So there's a lot of reasons to stay away from him. And, again, you look at those prices and he's just, I don't get it. I'm more than happy to pass on him as the second favorite, as someone that's in single digits to win this tournament. Any other thoughts, Candace, here before we jump into Barcelona?
Nope.
All right, let me get that bracket up here. I now understand why Steve is always clicking so furiously. It takes a little while to pull this stuff up here. Now, Barcelona, we are in Spain. So to the surprise of no one, the number 1 seed here is Rafael Nadal. Down there on the bottom, David Goffin, kind of enjoying his seed still. It's just a mess for him. But as you look at this half, Kei Nishikori, winning matches in a court that he's very comfortable at. Some fun names here. This draw is a little more interesting to me. What do you see here in the top half, Candace?
I thought it was more interesting as well. Someone like Garin is quite interesting there towards the top, potentially playing Nadal after, assuming they both make it through their next matches. The bottom, I think, is really fun. You see Goffin, you see Herbert there as well, Kachanov. So, it's one of these ones that it's kind of competitive, I suppose, probably for everybody but Nadal. But a lot of matches I'll be interested to see throughout the course of this section. I do think Nadal comes through. I don't see anybody who really has the clay court weapons, I suppose, to take him down. And I'm not terribly concerned from what we saw in Monte Carlo for a couple of reasons. One, as always, the humidity doesn't typically play super well to Nadal as far as conditions are concerned. And he clearly was frustrated with what was happening with his serve. And that's one of those things that with him, it's a match thing. You don't expect that to carry over to the following week. And we might question Djokovic's motivation in Serbia, but we definitely don't question Nadal's motivation here in Spain.
Yeah, Nadal off a loss is generally someone you want to back. He's in his home country now. It isn't a big event, but he's got plenty of time to play this, maybe rest the next week and get ready for the next big event before Roland Garros. His draw, not the easiest draw in the world, honestly. I mean, the winner of Garin and Nishikori there, I think, is going to be tough in the quarterfinals. I think Kachanov will probably meet him there in the semifinals, but he'll be a huge favorite in those matches. Me saying it's tough means that, someone might win a couple games off of him in his home country, but I expect him to come out here motivated, trying to get himself in shape. Again, that bottom section there, Herbert and Goffin, happy to pass on that. I think Kachanov actually has a nice chance to make through the quarter here. Thought about him for my value pick, but he didn't end up being that simply because he's stuck there with Nadal. And I expect him to come back and play very well and focused and be motivated after the loss.
Yeah, and we talk about tournaments. We spoke about it last week with Monte Carlo in tournaments that Nadal's won off. And I mean, I think he's won this tournament, 10 or 11 times, some obscene number. Yeah. So we know he's very comfortable here.
It'd be interesting. I'll have to go back and see. I wonder if he has the most titles at a place like 8, 9, 10 times or something, because it's just hard for me to think of another player that has. I mean, I forget how many French Opens he has. It's 1 million. And he's got, almost 9 or 10 titles in Monte Carlo. He's got 10-some titles here. I wonder if I go back and look if anybody has that much, dominance in a few places.
Yeah. I mean, because he always he's very consistent about the tournaments he plays, and he tends to, win a lot of them, especially on clay. So, yeah, it would be interesting, how many players have, have multiple tournaments where they have, 10 or more victories. I wonder how many there really are. Yeah.
I'll have to spend some time putting that together. But any other thoughts in the meantime on the top half before we jump into the bottom section of Barcelona?
No, the only thing that I would basically add is that, for me, I think the real threats to Nadal are on kind of the bottom half of that section. And I could really see those guys kind of duking it out with each other, especially because of the presence of someone like Goffin, who is a grinder, before they even get to Nadal. So it wouldn't surprise me if whoever kind of makes it through that, if it winds up being a little bit of a war of attrition more than anything.
Yeah, I will be a little disappointed if Nishikori comes out of another 3-set here and just looks exhausted and just gets blown out by Nadal. Hopefully, as much as I want that match to be competitive, you're right. I'd almost rather see a more competitive match there against Nadal. So we'll see how that goes. But let's jump into the bottom half of the draw here. Diego Schwartzman, our seed there on the top. Pablo Carreno Busta down there at the bottom. Some more interesting names here in the middle. Well, I say that. There are some interesting names, but it's not nearly, I think, as strong as the top half. How do you see the second half here shaking out?
Yeah, maybe it's not quite as strong, but as you mentioned, you still do have some of those names. You mentioned Schwartzman. Fognini, of course, is going to be here. He's always someone who you have to fear a little bit on this clay court surface. And you have several Spaniards who are more than capable, including the young Carlo Alcaraz. So you have a little bit of variety here, maybe more variety than we had in the section prior. It'll be interesting to see what happens of Dan Evans after what was a run that I don't think anybody anticipated next week. Does he back that up or does he come back down to reality? Maybe a touch, I suppose. But a tricky section. I think I would be looking to kind of gravitate towards the bottom half of this if I was looking for someone. The problem is I don't know totally who to look for. I think it's just very, very tough competitive tennis against guys who are very serviceable on the surface. And when it comes to clay, that gets difficult, right? Because when you have, when we said there's a competitive match on a hard court surface, those can go long and they can be really tiring, but there's something about the clay, you know what I mean? You have these very, very long extended matches and guys can get worn down incredibly quickly, especially at this point of the clay season. We're still so early into this portion. Some players are still looking ahead, and some players maybe haven't been playing super frequently coming into this either. So it's difficult for me to kind of put the nail on the head on somebody out of this section. I think I'm going to look to avoid. But if there is someone here who you really, really like, by all means, go for it. Because if there is a section of this tournament that's wide open, it's probably this one.
It's as I look through, there's a couple players that define each quarter, but just kind of as you hinted at, big question marks behind them. Schwartzman, of course, should do very well here, but he has struggled this year. Dan Evans coming off one of his better clay performances. Can he continue that run? It looks like the two of them will define that quarter, but maybe Francis Tiafoe finally starts to put stuff together here. I mean, he's very talented. If he's playing well, he could take advantage of a down Schwartzman, of Daniel Evans, maybe tired after a long run the week before. And as you look to the bottom quarter, again, it's Pablo Carreño Busta in his home country, but as much as everyone thinks of Spaniards as clay players, he's a better hard court player. He's had some nice results on clay. He's not terrible on the surface, but he's not someone you're looking to pick. And as you look in through the rest of this quarter, I mean, you don't want Thompson, you don't want Gasquet, Kuznetsov, obviously already lost his Zapata Morales there. You've got Fognini here at the top, and maybe you'd like to attack him, but similar to what we talked about with Berrettini in the last round, you just don't know what he's bringing to the table here every week. So the bottom's tough. If I have to pick somebody, I am going to take Schwartzman. I think he's struggled. Hopefully he's finally started to get a little bit healthy here. If there is a get right spot, this is it for him. He's got the bye. As much as I think Tiafoe's talented, he should beat him. He should have enough to take care of Evans, and whoever comes out of that fourth quarter going to the final, get smoked by Nadal and just kind of move on to the next thing. But I think Schwartzman is going to put it together here. What do you think? Any other thoughts on the bottom half?
I mean, I think if you were going to force me to pick someone, and maybe it's, a little bit more valuable than what we'll get to as our top selections, but I would probably just kind of throw a dart at Alcaraz. I mean, I liked what we saw from him at Andalucia. Obviously beat Feliciano Lopez. He beat Casper Ruud. Ended up losing to Munar, but obviously another very young, serviceable player from Spain. I believe Alcaraz has won the Challenger tournament here in Barcelona as well. So maybe a bit familiar with this sort of conditions, but he should be able to beat Tiafoe, I would think. And then Schwartzman's a lot tougher. Is the young teenager ready for that type of a level? I'm not sure. But with this kind of section being so competitive, I think maybe the approach is to go for somebody who's a little bit more outside the box. And so that's probably who I would look to.
Yeah, it's, a theme in the ATP. Look for Djokovic, look for Nadal, and go to the other half. And, this is a nice spot for us. It's very competitive. As we talked through, it is hard for us to pick some names out of here, but this is where you want to go. If you're trying to pick apart a tournament, this is how you do it. From an outright perspective, you're trying to avoid players like that as long as you can, and this is the best way to do it.
Well, I think it's like a betting philosophy thing too. So often people want, well, who's going to win? Give me A, B, C. And sometimes it's not always that obvious. I mean, I come from the world of horse racing, and I've made plenty of wagers on horses who I didn't think were the most likely winner in the race, but the odds dictated that, or maybe another horse not running in that race dictated me going in that direction. So, sometimes when we're saying things like, well, I don't really know who I would pick here, but this is maybe the section that you really want to focus on. There's value in that too. Don't kind of put yourself in the box of thinking, I have to like this player to win, because there are other ways of making it through and still getting yourself a profit. You don't have to be so tied, I suppose, or invested emotionally to the player themselves. Sometimes just kind of let the numbers speak to you a bit.
Yeah, you have to. And that's why we split it up. Part of the reason we have this segment is because we like to give you someone who's going to pick to win. But at the same time, we always go through our value segment. And, as you're a listener of the show, as you watch it, I'm sure you're used to those conversations. And that was a great way to sum it up. So let's jump into our picks to win. And I think, again, this will be no surprise. Steve picked Rafael Nadal. I'll jump ahead and say I picked Rafael Nadal. Gee, Candace, I wonder who you picked. Well, you're on mute. It's hard for the people to hear you.
I don't even know. Did we break down the whole tournament there?
Well, I think we did. That was top, half, bottom. Do we not?
No.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Oh, Jesus. What a mess.
You're like, man, it's going to be
Well,
obvious. I'm like,
I forgot that this one was a little bit bigger.
Player yet.
Excuse me. Hold on. Let's go back. We'll have to rewind and delete this. This is why we need Steve. It's just
that was the top half.
We have a whole 2 quarters, guys. Apologies. I didn't realize this was this big. Of course, we're off the rails here. How about the third quarter here, Candace? We've got RBA, Rublev off a very good week for himself. Didn't get the title, but second place ain't too shabby. How do you see this third quarter shaking out?
All I wanted was something to overshadow Flipkins, and I think this did it, so I'm good. Again, another section of the draw that is really competitive. I think what's going to be interesting about this section is you have a few players in here who in particular did really well last week. And we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get into our actual selections, but I'm going to be doing a lot of fading of guys who played really well last week. So I'm going to be trying to work around them. Guys like Rublev, or like Ruud as well. I mean, they're in the same section there. I'd be looking more towards kind of the top portion there. I will say I gave a really, really long look to Jannik Sinner. We know that he had the incredibly difficult first round match there against Djokovic last week. He doesn't have anything like that here. I mean, Gerasimov is serviceable, but he's no joker. So I'll be interested to see how Sinner's able to do here with a little bit more realistic section to work from. So I like him to kind of come out of this section here. He'd be the one who I'd be leaning towards. I just think it's a little bit more favorable for him. And he has a couple players who they had pretty long kind of taxing weeks last week.
This is a really fun quarter. We'll see how Rublev again does coming off the long week. He has a fairly easy second match here, and I wonder if having a bye will give him enough time to recover and move forward, and he'll be focused here. I'd be really excited to see him play Ruud again. RBA there at the top. I'm excited for him to play center. This is just more of a quarter where I have matches circled to probably go back and watch again. Would love to see Rublev again. I think RBA Sinner will be very good, and I think that Sinner's in good shape here, but I think the winner of that Rublev match is actually where I'm looking. I think those two players are maybe better equipped on this surface. And, again, if Rublev is focused, he's at this point one of the best players on tour on clay. I think we can pretty clearly say that. You go back and look at some of his numbers. He's put up, almost Nadal-like numbers, honestly, over the last year and a half or so, against some pretty good players. So if he's here, if he's focused, that'll be pretty interesting. But we'll get back to that. Ruud was a name that I had circled here in this quarter, but I think this is the most competitive quarter. This is pretty fun. Anything else to add before we jump to the fourth quarter?
No, but it is going to be a fun one. Lots of guys who not only are playing well, but are kind of fit for this surface as well.
We've got a Canadian at the top. We've got our champion last week, the Greek Stefanos Tsitsipas, down at the bottom. Candace, as you look at this fourth quarter, what do you think? I mean, is Stefanos going to come out and do his very best, or maybe some of these other names like Munar, Demonauer, FAA's here, Shapovalov again is not too bad on the clay. How do you see this fourth quarter shaking out?
Well, I'll start by saying this is the part of the podcast where you press pause and you go back to last week and you hear me say, Stefanos Tsitsipas, who's betting him on clay? He's so overvalued. And then you just play the sad trombone after that. I mean, he was great. Obviously, he was great last week. It was a tournament that also really fell apart. I mean, that's no disservice to how well he played, but it did kind of fall apart in a way that was really favorable to him from a draw perspective. I'm going to stick with my gut feeling, and that's that he's generally overvalued in these tournaments long term, because it's about the long term game here, not short term. And I think Joe Munar is really, really tough for him right off the bat. This is, again, another young player who not only is very good on this surface, but he comes in here in some nice form as well. Obviously, we saw him in Andalucia go down in 3 sets to PCB. I thought he was very good throughout the course of that tournament. I believe he made the final and lost to Majer over in April. That might have been in Spain as well, if I recall. But he's been playing extremely well this season. We've seen him come to a couple of finals recently. Now, he hasn't been able to get the job done in the finals themselves, and maybe that's still a little bit of a sign of his youth. He's in his early 20s at this stage. But this is a section that should be kind of ripe for him. You have big name players who, have been playing well at spots this year, but you also have guys who, well, and not also guys, it's those same guys who, one, maybe either aren't totally kind of find the surface to be their best surface, or they've had some mental lapses this year. We look to a guy like Felix, who at times has gone on real runs, and then he'll just have those moments where he cracks under pressure in the big points, the times where he has to get the job done. I think we've seen a little bit of similar from that from Shapovalov as well. So I'm going to go to Munar. I think similar to my philosophy last week with Ruud, where I thought, okay, this is a guy who's kind of on the cusp of breaking through at this sort of a level, and he now has a draw to show that he's capable of doing that. I think that's what we see here from Munar.
Yeah, this is another one. I like what you picked there. Munar's a solid value play again. Tsitsipas coming off that win. We'll see how motivated he is here. If he does beat Munar, it doesn't get too much easier. I mean, that next match will be a loser, but then it's Shapovalov, maybe FAA, maybe even Musetti, somebody like that, and it just gets tougher from there. I think that you've got a good name pick there. I would want somebody hopefully who's a little further away than Tsitsipas, but as I look at the top section, it's just hard for me to pick someone. I mean, we know that FAA is working with Uncle Tony, and apparently that's a big deal. So we'll see if maybe he starts to put it together here. But this is just a tough quarter for me to pick apart. Any other thoughts here now before we finally get to our pick?
I think the only things I would say is, it's funny because I understand your philosophy on wanting to be away from Tsitsipas. I actually like that Munar gets him right off the bat. I think sometimes that's the best time to beat some of these top guys, especially guys like him who, he plays really well, but he's not maybe as accustomed to winning as many tournaments as the likes of a Nadal or a Djokovic. So it still is a little bit new to him to come to tournaments with this sort of a kind of a fresh success at a Masters 1000 on his back. So I like that Munar plays him right away. And I did like the Uncle Tony dig. It's kind of funny because it has been such a big deal and I get it. But in the same breath, I do think there's a difference in coaches, right? You have some coaches who have been able to kind of revitalize a player and bring them to a new level. Someone like Uncle Tony, I mean, I wonder what someone else even really gets out of him. I mean, obviously he's a great tennis mind, but it's been with his nephew his whole life. I think that's a very different circumstance from coaching someone else. So we'll see. Maybe I'm a little bit skeptical.
It's hard to judge someone as a coach when they've coached arguably the greatest clay tennis player of all time. So let's keep our mind on that. Now, I kind of screwed the pooch here a little bit. We know that Steve already picked Rafael Nadal. And I already picked Rafael Nadal. And if you were listening, you probably figure out who Candace picked. But now that we're done the draw, Candace, who do you like to win the tournament?
I don't know. I guess we'll go with Nadal. He's won this tournament, I mean, at least 10 times. It might be 11. We know some of these Spanish players can struggle with the likes of a Madrid at elevation, but it's not the case here. So, yeah, good luck. He doesn't have a draw that I would term easy, but it's not overly difficult either.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Now, as we move on to our value picks, Steve liked your Yannick Sinner talk, but you had somebody else lined up, and you kind of broke it down for us already. Any other thoughts here on Mr. Munar, who, by the way, I don't know if you saw it while you were talking about him earlier, our buddy Trevor Never here wants to know why nobody likes Munar.
Oh,
There is somebody that likes Munar. There's somebody that likes Munar a lot. Here she is. Anything else you want to add to what you mentioned earlier?
Maybe he caught me out there. I do like the David Ferrer reference. That's a really good comparison between the two of them. He is kind of one of those guys who can go out there. You always know his motivation. You always know that he's going to fight hard on every single point. And again, for me, if you listened last week and you heard the philosophy behind Casper Ruud, it's incredibly similar. You have a few players. I find it, and I don't know if this is the case for you, Alex, but I find on the clay especially, I can probably name 6 or 7 guys who feels like they're on the cusp of a really big win. And that feels like more than the other surfaces just at this stage for some reason. But Munar is one of those guys. So for me, with those guys in particular, I'm just kind of waiting for them to get a draw that appears open enough that they can do some damage. And I think that's the case. And I love his spot here in the tournament playing Tsitsipas right off the bat. It gives you the opportunity to kind of get down on a match where, I'd imagine he's going to be a pretty heavy dog there right off the bat. So hopefully get us a little bit of money straight away.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about clay, and I think kind of the idea you're circling is that there's a specialization to a clay game. It's not maybe as specialized as grass, but we don't have nearly as much grass. And I think if you start to look at some of the top elite players, you have Djokovic, Nadal, as much as we think of him as a clay player, still very good on hards. Medvedev loves hard courts. Zverev, all those guys, when you start to look at some of the top ranked guys, even Thiem, very good very good clay player, but happy to play on hards. So as you start to get to, again, clay, as you start to get to grass, they become more specialty surfaces, if you will. It requires more of a unique skill set. And again, given how good some of the top players are on hard courts versus clay, somebody like Medvedev, again, it goes from being one of the best players in the world on hard to someone we're happy to maybe go against on clay. So I think that what you're talking about there in terms of specialization makes a lot of sense. And a guy like Munar just fits that bill perfectly, I think.
Yeah, I think that, and I think maybe just the kind of the gravitization of the game towards more power. So you see a greater difference, I would say, even nowadays, between what you need to be an elite hardcore player versus what you need to be an elite clay court player. Now, obviously, some of the best in the world, they're able to kind of be serviceable on both. But I do think there are quite a few, especially younger players or players who are moving through the ranks who on hard courts really rely on their power. And so because the clay season comes right after the hard court season, some of those guys who maybe went on a run or won a couple of matches and now in the early portion of the clay season are still being kind of treated kindly by the books because they did have good form. You can work your way around those guys and find value elsewhere.
Absolutely. Another guy in that mold, we've talked about him a couple times. You had him as your value pick last week. I'm happy to back him this week. The friendly ghost, Mr. Casper Ruud. Fantastic. Again, everything you just talked about, has all the power you need to hit through the clay, has all the movement you need, and just understands how to play this surface. I like that he's in the bottom half there away from Nadal. Yes, he's in a quarter that's pretty tough, but as we talked about, I think he'll have an opportunity to take advantage of some matches where some players kind of cannibalize each other with some longer, more competitive matches. So happy to back Casper Ruud here as my value pick as well.
He's been a joy to watch. He caught my eye many years ago for the sheer reason that he's Norwegian and I'm half Norwegian. And I'm like, what's this Norwegian tennis player? And it's been a joy to watch his development because you would know there's so many young players on either side who you see flashes of talent when they're young and then it never formalizes. And it feels like year on year, we've really seen him really develop, especially on the surface.
Well, it's fun to learn you're Norwegian. I'm an 8th Norwegian. That's where the last name comes from. That's why it's an S-O-N. If it was S-E-N, I'd be Danish. But here we are.
I'm half. My mom's maiden name was Reese, but in reality, it's Reise, R-E-I-S-E. Very Nordic.
I like that. We used to be Christensens, but that was tough for people. So now we're Christensens.
Yeah, they all just change it when people can't say it.
Just adapt.
Yeah.
As we look at the unforced errors, Steve was too lazy to pick one. Candace and I, we kind of set this up here. I have Stefanos Tsitsipas. Candace has Stefanos Tsitsipas. Again, coming off that win, looking at this draw. You've got Rafa at the top, that just mess of a third quarter. Some of the people we already talked about with Munar. Anything else you wanted to add here about Tsitsipas?
I mean, I guess I would just still say that I'm not a believer. I mean, maybe in saying that he's going to win the French Open now and we'll be able to play this in a couple of weeks. But I'm just not. And that's not to say anything, disrespectful to his game. He's an incredible player. I'm just of the belief from what I see from him week in and week out and the numbers, because we spoke about the stats behind it last week and they suggest the same, even though he was able to win. They just suggest that he's not as good of a player on clay as he is on other surfaces. I think he's a good enough player that when a tournament kind of falls into his lap like it did there, he's able to take advantage. But that's not the kind of player that I want to be backing straight after a win, because you know the odds are going to be too short. And I do think in general, and I've said this a few times, I think, and this is even before he won, I felt like this is a player who's going to generally be overvalued going forward throughout the course of the summertime. And that's only going to be more substantial now that he was able to get a victory under his belt.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. As we jump forward here, our overvalued players, Candace, it looks like you had Andrei Rublev. Do you want to maybe break that down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, his is a little, I suppose I'd say I'm a little less certain about his than I am about Tsitsipas, because I have no issue with Rublev on the clay. He's definitely one of the best in the world on the surface, and he tends to play a really nice game. My concern for him was, one, last week, he had, it was a very difficult tournament. He didn't have maybe as clean cut of a draw as a few other people had, and his draw here isn't necessarily ideal either. He potentially has to face Ruud if he's able to make his way through just a pair of matches. And then if you were to go through that, there's the likes of Sinner, who I'd anticipate is going to be able to put a nice run together, a guy who didn't have to play much last week, so we know he's well rested. And if not him, maybe it would be somebody like an Andahar or like an RBA, who, again, serviceable over the surface. So that'd be my concern, just that he had a pretty testing week last week, and he unfortunately found himself in a section where there's no world beaters, but several guys who are very, very good on this surface. And sometimes in these clay court tournaments, that's kind of the last thing you want. I think sometimes it's almost better to have somebody who's very good and you have one maybe difficult match you have to get through, versus, the prospect of maybe 2, 3, or even 4 kind of long matches back to back to back. That's the tough angle, I think, for here. He plays the Italian right off the bat. That should be easy enough. But when you look after that, you have the prospect of 3, if not 4, very difficult, potentially very taxing long matches.
Steve agrees with you, and I've gone in the same section, but I went to the top. RBA, again, is in the top of this third quarter. I don't think Andahar will actually be the easiest second-round match there. I expect Sinner to be there. Then he's got the winner of Casper Ruud and Rublev, and that's just to get out of this quarter, and he's one of the 3 to 4 top favorites here. So happy to avoid him at some of these prices, again, given his draw. So it seems like we're all kind of pulling in the same direction. Any other thoughts here on Barcelona before we jump to the WTA and talk about Stuttgart?
I think the only thing that I would say about Barcelona, and it's with respect to Munar, who we mentioned as my value play. Again, guys like him, I think they're about Barcelona. I'd be looking to play him match to match as more of a parlay than, kind of trying to go for the win. I'm still very concerned about, the other Spaniards playing against Nadal, and I guess I'm saying this and assuming Nadal is going to make it through the top half. But they have such a poor record against him, and I would have a feeling that if that did end up being the final, that it would be even a larger gap, just because he's a young player who is, really idealized Nadal, and he's a player who struggled to kind of break through in a final, even though he's been making several of them in smaller tournaments. So just keep that in mind from kind of a strategy perspective. I'm looking more kind of match to match with him than I am, the overall, especially considering we have the Tsitsipas match right off the bat.
Yeah, that's a big consideration to make. Outright prices sometimes look very good at some of those bigger numbers, but you start to get down to a deeper level, a lot of these do better going match to match. So if you are going to be serious about betting some of these outrights, take some time, open a parlay calculator, and try to put in what you think the money lines are going to be along the way, and compare that to some of your outright prices. It's a very important exercise to do. Now, I think we're ready. Let's jump into the WTA. We'll start with the event here in Stuttgart. Ashley Barty here is our top seed in the top half. I double checked. I know what the actual size of this tournament is. So we're going to talk about all of it. Ashley Barty here at the top, Kvitova down there at the bottom, Svitolina, Pliskova there. Some fun names here in Stuttgart. What do you see, Candace, in this top half of the draw?
Well, I mean, you look right up there and you see Ashley Barty to kick things off, of course, sitting there as our 1 seed. I guess I should say for us, the enigma that is Ashley Barty, because that's, it feels like the tournaments that we've tried to beat her, she's played very well. And then the tournaments where we've said, this is it, she wins, then she struggled. So anybody's guess, I suppose, what to expect from her, because it hasn't been the easiest, at least for me, player to kind of pin my nose on what she's going to do here. For me, I found myself gravitating towards Svitolina in this section. That usually is the kiss of death, so that probably isn't a good thing. But for me, that was the way that I wound up looking. I think that she's in a section there where you do have Kvitova, and she's the real danger, but most of the other players are more, players I'd be more concerned about, maybe on a different surface. So I'm going to go Svitolina in this section. I can't say that with an overwhelming amount of confidence, but if you were going to have me choose, that's the way I'd go. This is a section that to me could get very messy very, very quickly, which is good and bad, right? It means there's nobody there who terrifies me, but in the same breath, knowing who's going to make it through could be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, one of the more interesting parts about these two WTA tournaments, we've only had one event on the red clay, if you will. Yes, we've had two events in Charleston. They were great. We should have a third. But that's not really clay. It's not the red, thick, heavy, slow clay. And as you start to look at this, we had one event in Bogota, and most of those women are not playing here and not playing in Istanbul. So for just about everybody, and I think everyone in this field specifically, this will all be their first match, besides qualifiers who've had a chance to warm up. Curious to see how Barty does with that. I believe this is her first clay tournament since winning the French Open. So, that's a pretty big moment to come in. It was over a year ago, so maybe she's not thinking about that too much. The first quarter, I look at it. If Karolina Pliskova is still alive, this is where she starts to find some form. We're indoors here. It should help her serve. She's done here well before. I would be excited to see her play Ashley Barty, and would kind of be my dark horse there in the first quarter. But I'm certainly not counting on that. I mean, she could lose to Ostapenko there in that second round. So as much as I'm not excited to look at Ashley Barty, I kind of held my nose and picked her to win, because I got to pick somebody. As I look at the bottom, Kvitova is the defending champion. And as I look at her schedule, she got out of Charleston as quickly as she could. And I think it was to get here, get ready, get prepped, and start to defend some of these points. Kind of on the surface, Sakkari and Svitolina might be tougher matches, but those are players she beats regularly. Those are women that are not going to be able to out-hit her, that, yes, they move around a lot, but she's an intelligent player. She's going to hit winners when she needs to. She is not going to get stuck into playing long rallies with players like them. So I'm not too worried about her draw. I've got Kvitova moving through and winning this half, just, again, simply because I think that she was focused. It looks like she moved out and has been practicing here for quite some time. And I'm just not so worried about this draw. I think she moves through this quarter, and then it's Ashley Barty, maybe Karolina Pliskova, two players that I think she has advantages over.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other thoughts here on the top half?
Nope.
All right, we jump down here into the bottom half. My girl, Arena, the Amazonian warrior princess, Sabalenka, is the top seed here in 5. Unfortunately, she's not as good in clay as she is in some other surfaces. Halep back here after her shoulder injury in Miami that forced her to withdraw. She has been practicing, taking a lot of pictures with Daniel Cahill. We'll see how all that goes. How do you see this bottom half shaking out?
For me, when I was looking at this bottom half, initially I was excited because I felt like, maybe it could be a little bit attackable in that third quarter. There isn't really anybody who jumps off the page, but I just couldn't work my way around knowing that Halep was there towards the bottom. I think for me, the play in this tournament is just going to be trying to work my way around Halep, which is not always the easiest thing to do on the clay courts, but I do think this is the time of year to try to do it. So for me, much of this kind of section as a whole is going to be a little bit of a watch and see section, I suppose, for me, with the hopes that I see Simona Halep go down at some point.
Yeah, Halep is, if everyone was here and everyone was healthy, she would be the pick. She is the best clay player here. I worry about her shoulder. I worry about what she's been doing, how that also might affect her back, which again is something that comes and goes at a moment's notice. And her quarter's pretty tough. She's got a bye, but then it's Buzkova or Vondrousova. Either Czech is going to be very difficult. I think Mahova or Belinda Bencic is going to be there again in that next match. That's going to be very competitive. And, I kind of jabbed Sabalenka for some of her play on clay, but if there's ever a tournament she's going to do well at on clay, this is it. She's indoors. She has two really easy matches here to start, and then gets the winner probably of Kontaveit Kenin. Kenin, very poor on the dirt since her run late last year, just poor in general. And Kontaveit's been very good here, but has struggled against Sabalenka. Again, if she runs into that match, there's not really anything Kontaveit does better than Sabalenka. So would really have to have an off match for Arena there. And, as I built up that fourth quarter, I think, again, it kind of cannibalizes itself. So I actually have Sabalenka coming out of here. I'm willing to take kind of, the roll of the dice here and the leap of faith that she puts it together on clay. She's played great tennis all year. Again, it's indoors. These are good conditions. This is a great draw for her to attack. So I've got her coming out of the bottom half.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. And she's far enough away from Halep that something had happened down there that makes the road a lot easier. But definitely understand the appeal of somebody in form and somebody who in general has played a lot of tennis. I think that's such a key. As you mentioned, they haven't been playing on the surface. I mean, even much less so for the women than the men. So fitness is going to be so key. And we know that should be on Sabalenka's side.
Any other thoughts on the draw before we go through our picks?
Nope.
Let's dive in. Steve picked Simona Halep to win, and I'll rip on that later.
Steve.
I know.
He's always got to be that guy.
He is that guy. I took Petra Kvitova, kind of built that up earlier. Again, defending champion, like where she is in the draw. I think that, she's built everything up toward this week. It seems that you agree. Why do you agree?
I picked Kvitova as well. I thought, Halep aside, I thought that Kvitova and Svitolina, who I mentioned earlier, were kind of that next tier as far as players on the surface are concerned. So I put Kvitova to win because she's a shorter price than Svitolina. It was kind of that simple. I really like the two of them in here, and I think it really kind of zeroes in on sort of that portion of the draw that we're focusing on, which again is one where you have the two of them. One of them, whoever makes it through of them, if assuming they end up playing each other, is probably the one to have. And we got to pick one before then. So that's where I went.
Now, as much as I made fun of Steve here, we'll jump into our value picks. I agree with him here. He's got Kvitova, and so do I. She's not the favorite to win this tournament. I think you should be the favorite to win this tournament. It's really kind of that simple. Ashley Barty is the favorite. She's tied with Halep. We talked through all the question marks with Halep. I'll get to the Halep price later. The Ashley Barty price, again, I like Kvitova in that match. I think that she has, a little tougher quarter, but those are winnable matches. And when it gets to Kvitova Barty, I'm going to be happily backing Kvitova. Already bet her on an outright perspective. She was anywhere from 7 to 9 to 1. I think anything better than 5 or 6 to 1 is a solid bet given her draw and her success here. So that was our value pick. Now, Candace, your value pick with somebody else in. Just to give you a heads up, I might go the other way later.
That's okay. I mean, I put Svitolina there for the pure perspective that I liked her a little bit less than Kvitova, as I think is deserved. She's a slightly longer price. So I think for me, I was just trying to give the option from a draw perspective to kind of narrow in on the aspect of the draw that I thought was kind of a serviceable one for really tough clay court players like the two of them. So if anybody's out there and they think, I like Kvitova, but I try to kind of play around with a little bit larger odds, then that would be the option I would go with.
Yeah. Now let's jump through some of our unforced errors. None for Steve, none for you. I did pick Simona Halep as my unforced error. I don't think that you can really do anything with her. Again, had the shoulder injury, and it was so bad. And she's a tough player. She comes out and plays hurt sometimes. It was so bad that she chose to withdraw from Miami. Again, one of the bigger tournaments of the year, one of the biggest non-Grand Slam events, a tournament she does well in generally every year. So pretty concerned about that. Yes, she's been practicing. Yes, she's back with Cahill, her coach, which has been very, very good. Just a lot of questions around that, a lot of questions around her draw. So I'm happy to kind of take a pass on her this week. Now, as we look to some of our overvalued here, Steve stole your pick, Candace, because you think Ashley Barty here is a little overvalued. I know we both kind of circled this here, but why don't you give us a minute or two on that?
Yeah, we spoke about the fact that this surface is one she hasn't played on in over a year. I mean, we've had a lot of Ashley Barty hasn't done this in over a year over the last month or so. This is another one of them. I would have to think there's a little bit of concern after Miami when she retired there in the final against Andreescu. I mean, she made a nice run. I think she played better than certainly I expected her to play right off the jump. We know the motivation is there, of course, for her to do well and to really rack up points while she can. But I'm just a little bit concerned about the surface, about what the state of her fitness at this stage as well. And that's something, as we've kind of beat over with the drum throughout this, is so necessary on the surface. Now, her first couple of matches, I don't think are incredibly difficult. So if she's able to ease her way into the tournament before she goes against someone like Pliskova, then, maybe that's going to help her out a little bit. But it gets much, much tougher after that. And if she isn't fit and ready to go, or a match or two gives her some trouble, then I think she's going to be in real bad shape. And she's too short for mine with that in mind.
Now, as I mentioned, I don't necessarily agree with Elena Svitolina here being value. She's pretty close to the price Kvitova was. As I looked at some of the betting markets here, that quarter with Sakkari was Svitolina with Kvitova. They tucked everybody right in there at these really tight prices. And again, very confused, because as I look at my numbers, I have Kvitova as a solid favorite over both of them. So to see all that stuff close together, coming off, her big engagement announcement, personal stuff like that does carry over into work. It does. I don't know if she's been playing tennis or kind of partying with Gail and kind of doing her thing. We know she likes to spend time on boats. But you look at this draw, you look at this surface, you look at the players she has to beat. I think that she is going to be kind of outgunned here starting in her second or third match throughout the tournament. So the market has her as, kind of one of the 4 or 5 favorites. I disagree.
I think she's going to be rejuvenated. They're not broken up anymore. They're not fighting life happily ever after with, everybody wants a Frenchman, right? So,
I don't know, not me personally. Anyway, but you're right. Maybe that it could be the other side of the coin, right? I'm expecting her to celebrate, but maybe that kind of, settling down and safety and stability in her personal life maybe could help. So
maybe
we'll see how that plays out.
I know in golf, I know a couple of guys who are big kind of golf bettors, and they'll say, I'm playing this guy had a baby angle. And usually it's for a very positive one. So you never know.
It's pretty good. I've seen it in basketball games, especially before guys coming back after the first game after having a kid. They put up some points.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other thoughts here on Stuttgart before we wrap up with the final WTA tournament? It is, in fact, not in Constantinople, Candace, but we are in Istanbul.
Oh, we're going to sing?
But Istanbul is Constantinople. Elise Mertens is the number 1 seed. Barbara Krejcikova down there as the 5 seed. Kudermetova off her title win in Charleston. We love that. It's really a whole lot of fun. Some interesting names here overall. It's not as talented as a field, obviously, as Stuttgart, but I think there's some interesting things that could happen. Give us your thoughts on the top half of the draw here.
For me, one, I was on here with you when I was kind of finalizing, going through my 2 or 3 people I liked on who I was going to select. And I think you heard me say this tournament. And I don't mean that in like a overtly negative way. I meant it in that it's so difficult for me to pick somebody out because you just really don't have anybody who stands out. And I do think any tournament where Mertens is the 1 seed, that's a tournament that you should be able to attack. And I found it to be a little bit difficult for me to do that. When I was looking through here on the top portion of the draw, I'll be perfectly frank with you, I didn't have a lot. Much of the focus for mine is going to be on that second half of the draw when we get to that one. But this is one of those frustrating situations where, in theory, when you look who's seated here, you think this should be a spot where I could really find some value. And yet some of the players who I would find a little bit interesting would be facing each other rather quickly. So it does me no good to go either way. So it's a watch and see draw for me. And I hate to say that because I'm sure that there's value hidden there if there's someone you like.
Yeah, almost every week I look at a draw and wish I could mix things up. This one especially, I wish I could take some of those names in the bottom half of the second quarter, put them up towards the first quarter there. Elise Mertens, I always talk about her as kind of my WTA measuring stick, if you will. If you beat her, you're probably a good player. If she beats you, you're probably not a good player. And as you look at this draw, she's going to beat everyone in this first quarter. Yes, there's a surface change. Maybe she gets kind of shocked by the qualifier in round 1. Again, this is almost everyone's first match on clay. So qualifiers are going to have an advantage here. But looking at the qualifiers this field, not too concerned. I think Mertens, even, maybe without having any clay form, will be solid here. I'm not worried about Golubic or the qualifier there in the next round. Maybe it's Mladenovic. She's had a really tough run here, but hasn't had a chance to play on clay in a while. And this is her best surface. She was kind of one of the more interesting names in the bottom half there. I don't know if I'm going to look at her from an outright perspective, but if she makes it to that match against Mertens, that'll be something I'll poke around into a little bit. Again, the second quarter full of names that are kind of interesting. Kudermetova coming off the title and isn't as good actually on your traditional clay versus, what she did in Charleston. Kanepi, very good on clay, but again, don't love her proximity to Kudermetova. And then you look down on that bottom four, Habino Bogdan, the winner of that match, I think is going to give Krejcikova some run. So a really competitive second quarter there. And I think Elise Mertens is going to take advantage. Again, maybe Mladenovic comes out an hour and puts something together, but really more of a devil's advocate thought than something I'm considering. I think, again, Elise Mertens does a nice job and moves through this half. Any other thoughts?
No, completely agree.
Let's jump into the bottom, where, again, hopefully we can find some stuff to take advantage, because I think we're both pretty clear about not being super excited about Mertens. But we continue to look. You've got Wang Jiang there at the top, Daria Kasatkina in the middle, a whole bunch of Russians, actually. It's kind of the Russian section there for a little bit, and Petra Martic at the bottom, who unfortunately has to play Fiona Ferro tomorrow in her first-round match. This is another spot I would love to take Ferro and put her just about anywhere else. But what do you see here in the bottom half?
Yeah, to completely agree with you with Farah. I would have loved to see her in a little bit more of a wide open section. I think the area of this tournament really to focus on is going to be that third quarter. You have the likes of Daria Kasatkina in there, who's been playing quite well and should really appreciate the conditions she gets, and her draw is not overly difficult. You mentioned the qualifiers having an advantage, but again, the depth of qualifiers isn't necessarily here. So she should get through that first round, and then, the likes of maybe a Kostyuk after that, and then, even her next match, it's just, not anything that I would be particularly worried by. So I think she's found herself a sweet spot. I think she's worth considering. I'm also going to really be monitoring tomorrow who makes it out of that Potapova-Pavlyuchenkova match. That one, I really liked Potapova going into it. I know the two have split sets. Typically you'd be really concerned about one of those players coming out of what's been a really tough, back and forth match, but at least it was suspended and they get a little bit of time to rest. And I think that's going to make all the difference in the world for one of them in a section of the draw that's there for the taking, if they're able to kind of back up that match with another good performance.
Yeah, the fourth quarter is tough for me. The third quarter, I think you set up Kasatkina nicely. What a great quarter for her. I think she's in a great shape to win her third tournament this year. That's right, folks. She already has 2 trophies. She's a qualifier, I think probably even a qualifier, given how poorly Kostyuk has played this year. Now, we have the surface change. She's much better on clay. Again, maybe she kind of finds herself. One of the things I'm trying to do is I'm looking at recent form, trying to give people a break who are better clay players who have struggled on hard, and she's very much someone on that list. So maybe she puts it together. But either way, I think Kasatkina moves her way through here. I was actually happy as someone that already has a Kasatkina outright to see Irani knocked out, because she's just kind of funky. And I don't think Konju is really going to, make it through there and give too much trouble. So I like Kasatkina in the third. And the name of the fourth that stuck out to me was Herzog. She's coming off a title. Now, it is an ITF title, the lower level, but got some reps on clay, had a whole week to play in clay. And I don't think actually played the final. I don't know if she won that on a walkover or retirement or something, but the final was very short. So I think that she's had a chance, at least a day or so, to come here, get prepared. She didn't have to play on the first day. She was kind of a name that stuck out to me. But again, unfortunately, she's going to have to play the winner of that Ferro Martic match. And then, like you said, maybe Pavlyuchenkova, maybe Potapova. We'll see how that goes. Just kind of a tough spot for her. Again, another name that I wish I could put somewhere else. But Kasatkina was definitely the name I had circled in this bottom half. Anything else you want to touch on before we jump into our picks?
Oh.
All right. Now, one of the reasons that, you guys might not have realized that Candace was upset that Steve didn't pick Petra Kvitova in the last tournament, because we've all picked Daria Kasatkina. Steve likes Kasatkina. I like Kasatkina. Candace likes Kasatkina. Anything to add? Again, in great form, in a great part of the draw, on a surface she really likes. All these wonderful things coming together. Can you even make a case? Any devil's advocate stuff you got for us? I mean, anything to kind of add what you said about Kasatkina already?
I don't have anything devil's advocate. The only thing I would say is, maybe not you, but I know for sure Steve and I have picked her at least once this year, and I don't think she's won any of those times. So it might just be us that is the jinx for her. But I mean, she's been fantastic this year. I think more than anything, I've been very impressed by her consistency of performance. Even in the tournament, she hasn't been winning. From match to match, she's been playing at a consistent level. And those players are a bettor's friend because you always know what you're going to get.
Let's jump into our value picks. Steve took Krejcikova. Again, I think maybe a little bit of a tougher draw, but a nice spot to attack. Now, Candace, who did you choose with your value pick? You kind of foreshadowed this earlier.
It's very dependent on a match in progress, but I do think Potapova should come through that Pavlyuchenkova match. Obviously, we got to see if that happens first. But if it does, then this is a little section of the tournament that I think is there for her. Is, you know, so long as she wasn't too taxed in this match. And I know it's been long and a difficult one, but at least they did get, you know, the time away to rest with it having been suspended. But, you know, you'd be looking to the winner of Sorana Cirstea or Kozlova, the latter of whom I don't think has even played tennis for the last 6 months or so. So nobody who's too difficult in that section. It gets different. It gets a little more difficult from there. But, you know, if you look at the likes of, you know, Fiona Ferro against Martic, that can be kind of a real difficult match between the two of them. It could go longer. Even Zvonareva against Hercog, that's not an easy walkover for either of them either. So, you know, it might be a little section here that it's going to kind of balance out as far as difficult early matches go. And again, I don't see anybody or anyone name-wise there that really, really terrifies me. And when you're looking at players at kind of longer odds, I think that's generally what you're looking for. So match pending, Potapova is interesting to me.
Same quarter, someone I already sort of talked about. And as much as I was maybe a little hesitant, she was a great number here. She was like 30-1 or better before the tournament. Again, that number is still floating around here live. If you got a chance to pick this up before some of the matches start tomorrow. Yes, I'm a little concerned that she has to play Ferro and Martic in the second round, but maybe those two are fatigued after kind of beating each other up in what I expect to be a tough match. If she makes a pass there, maybe it's Potapova, maybe it's Pavlyuchenkova, but I think given her form and all the skills she has, she's in good shape to advance through this quarter. And at that number, you know, maybe Kasatkina's there in the third, and that's kind of a bummer, but maybe she's not. And now you have a big number in the finals. I mean, she's probably close, if not the favorite of just about anybody else in that third quarter besides Kasatkina. So like the setup for her, and I think, you know, maybe books are undervaluing her title last week, and maybe people a little too concerned about the travel and the fatigue angle. So happy to take Herzog at a big number. Now, no unforced errors for you or Steve. I chose to give an unforced error here to Petra Martic, just simply based on her draw. This has nothing to do, you know, normally we talk about injuries or look-aheads or stuff like that. This just sucks. What a crappy draw she has. Ferro, then probably Herzog, then Potapova, then Kasatkina, and she's only in the finals at that point. So I'm happy to give her a pass here, given the surface change, given her draw. You know, when we get to the overvalued players here, I think Candace will have something to add. I know Steve thought she was overvalued, and I think you do too.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting how within the scope of just even, you know, one quarter, that one side of it can be so much more favorable than the other. You know, I'm sitting here talking about, you know, if Potapova is able to make it through her match, that this isn't too shabby for her. But then when you look down to Martic, you're like, oh, this is a little bit tougher for you. So it is funny how even two players who aren't that far away from each other in a draw could have draws that are, you know, vastly different. I suppose you would say different qualities. I thought that she was overvalued. She's a relatively short price, as you'd imagine. She's never one that I'm really able to kind of get a great gauge of either. So maybe it's a little bit more of a personal play in that regard.
And my overvalued player here, and I know that I'm going against my girl.
You're that guy.
Last time I talked about her, she won the title in Charleston. She's like the second or third favorite to win here. This is not her best surface. This is a tough draw. I am more than happy to avoid her at single digits. I love her. The Cooter Monster's the best, but I'm not betting her at single digits. I'm not really betting too many.
Oh my gosh. We were just talking about how love is in the air, and then you just dump her, right? One and done.
That goes. You just got, you know, kick him in the street sometimes, I guess. It's a shame. She'll be back soon, I promise. But this is not the week, not at single digits, not in this draw. Happy to pass on her. Any other thoughts here on Stuttgart or in general, Candace, before we wrap things up?
I don't. I'm just hoping we get a lot of winners, so we never have to have Steve back.
That's right.
Life
a lot of winners.
Life goals.
Less Australians. Much simpler from a scheduling perspective, if we're being honest, people. But thank you, everybody, again, for watching. Be sure you follow us. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube. Now, we're still on Periscope, even though apparently that's not supposed to exist anymore, but it seems to still exist. So if you are watching this on Periscope, that should be continuing going. Just, make sure you follow the YouTube in case that does one day actually disappear. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. Follow us, like us, rate us, review us. We'd appreciate all that stuff. And we'll be back soon with more tennis. Until then.